Microsoft Premier Field Engineer, platforms, clustering, Hyper-V is sort of my specialty. I've been a technology geek for 16 plus years. And some of the other things that are interesting, co-organizer, Charlotte PowerShell user group, so we're on the East Coast of North Carolina. So if you're in the area, we meet the first Thursday of the month. So, and obviously I wouldn't be before you today if I wasn't some sort of PowerShell enthusiast. And if you care to follow me, I'm on Twitter. And yes, that's my birth year. Probably going to be changing that soon because I'm getting older and old people get kind of paranoid about their age. So let's get dash agenda. See what I did there? So CIM, WMI terminology, we're just going to have a brief overview of terminology in CIM. Also, we're going to do what's called, in my opinion, CIM basic training. And just sort of an overlook of some of the important CIM commandlets. And then we'll get into scenarios, better stated, scenarios. See what I did there? So how to look at real-world situations. We'll get into that. So first, you guys work with CIM commandlets at all? I see one. All right. I see. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Richard. He wrote the book, right, or a book on CIM. So how about the WMI commandlets? Okay. Awesome. Good stuff. So the terminologies. Let's just kind of get everybody on an even playing field. So CIM, I kind of view it as sort of a folder structure, right? You have namespaces, which you would classify sort of as you can kind of correlate with a folder. And in those namespaces, you have classes. And then each class has an instance, at least one, or maybe multiple, depending upon the class. And those are just some of the examples of what we're looking at. So the namespace an example is root CIMv2, which is the default namespace. There's also a default namespace, which is not default, so go figure that one out. And we have classes. So those are some of the classes. 132 BIOS and 132 logical disk. We may see some of those throughout this journey that we have going on this morning. So an instance, single object of WMI class, like we talked about, or briefly mentioned. And popular instance members are going to be properties and methods. We'll focus a little bit on that. See, GSIM, that's, by the way, GSIM is the alias for GetSIM instance, which is sort of the equivalent for GetWMI object. So let's look at, as my voice cracks, at some of the CIM basic training. So with the CIM commandlets, with GetWMI object, you have GetWMI object, and you would just type a wildcard search for a class and then dash list, and it would give you sort of the name of your wildcard search. Well, with the CIM commandlets, starting with PowerShell 3, they made it a little easier for us by providing us this wonderful commandlet called getSIM class. So when I run this and I specify a particular class, notice how I get some details. And the details that are highlighted here are CIM class methods and CIM class properties. So that, again, goes back to what we were talking about. We're going to kind of focus on that a little bit. So what if I'm curious about those methods that are exposed from the 132_service class? So if I run this next one, which basically we're taking select object and expanding the property because it's an array, and specify the property name CIM class methods, I can see here what type of methods that I have. So notice I have start service, stop service, so on and so forth. Also, the nice thing about it, it will tell me the parameters for that method. So no longer do you, well, you still go to MSDN to kind of investigate those classes, but you can do it in PowerShell now. So it makes it really friendly, and you can work with it better. So that's the first commandlet that we'll talk about. So the second one is get some instance, and that's sort of the workhorse commandlet now. That's sort of like get WMI object was for the WMI commandlets. So this is going to return service object, or it's going to return instances of the Win32_service class. So notice how I have, services that are running, the process ID, so on and so forth. So if I wanted to filter it, because it's always great to filter on the left of the pipe, right? So I'm going to filter it. I'm just going to isolate bits in this case. So notice it comes back, and hey, it's running. But what if I wanted to stop that service? So I'm going to invoke the SIM method with the stop service method of the Win32_service class. When I run it, notice I get a return value. Return value of 0 means what? Right. Anything else means what? It means you got an issue, you need to check it out. So notice how on the first example, I grabbed what I was looking for and then piped it to invoke SIM method. Well, there's a different way that you can use invoke SIM method and just call it straight out. So instead, I'm going to use the query, isolate bits, and call the method start service in order to start it. Because it's currently not running, and we can confirm that by running this and see that it's stopped. So now I'm going to start the service. 0 means success. Next, I have a running bit service now. All right, so we'll take this a little further, moving right along. We'll leverage GetSim class for some discovery techniques. So let's say your manager asks you for a quick report on processors. You're not exactly sure what the class is for that. So what if you want to search for it? You don't have to go to the internet. You can actually have your console open, like any IT admin, and you just use GetSim class, and then specify the class name parameter. And when you run it, notice I have several classes that are popping up, and we'll see, which one seems interesting. Well, this Win32 processor seems interesting, so I'm probably going to leverage that to discover more about my processors. Or I know I can terminate processes, but I'm not right. Number one, I'm not real sure what the class is or even what the method name is. So I'm just going to say terminate. Kind of like Arnold. So we'll execute that using the method name parameter. So now I'm going to search for the terminate method using the star wildcard search, right? I'm going to run that. And then it comes back and it gives me the class that I'm looking for. Not only that, but it gives me the SIM methods here, like we looked at before. I can expand it and see, what type of arguments and whatnot it takes. And the other beauty for this command, probably one of my favorite parameters for this particular commandlet, is the ability to search the entire namespace for a particular property name. And I can do that using wildcard search, similar to the way that I use the method name. Instead, I'm going to pass it to the passive value to the property name parameter. So when I run this, it takes a few seconds to come back, and now I have my classes that have that particular property name. So, so that I don't really have to go and browse that class and figure out, okay, where is this particular property name? And how did it match the wildcard? I'm just gonna, pick one of them and pipe it to get member -name and specify that same wildcard search. So when I run that guy, it comes back and it tells me, hey, there's actually 2 properties that match your query. And that's what I'm going to target. So I included this bit of code. I'm not going to run it because it takes a long time. I'll make sure that it's available to you after the session. I'll post it on my OneDrive. But this is a recursive search for WMI. And Jason, one of my PFE friends here, we were bantering back and forth. I wanted to use sim commandlets to do this recursive search, and he's like, and WMI is still there, so it was a little easier to do. So basically using this technique up here, you can query all the namespaces within WMI if you're looking for a particular, whether it's method name, property name, what have you. Because by default, when you are using the sim commandlets or WMI commandlets, what's the namespace? What's the default namespace?
SIM2.
And not default, right? Like you would think. Awesome. So now you're graduating basic training, right? Everybody's kind of on the same playing field. So see what I did there? Stop doing the time. But we're kind of already there. Anybody MC Hammer fans?
Not anymore.
Yeah, it's kind of washed up, right? All right, scenarios, or better stated, scenarios. So I have this kind of recurring theme on my PowerPoint. I hope you guys appreciate it. But get scenarios. I'm going to say ID 1 and 2. I could have used positional there, I guess. Made a little fancy here. But anyway, so let's look at scenario 1. How many of you are SCCM or SCOM administrators? So I have a couple. How about Hyper-V administrators? Okay. So for the story, the kind of the backstory for this particular scenario is one of my PFE, Hyper-V PFE friends comes in. He starts talking about some quota in WMI, and I'm like, what? And so I got to investigate a little more. And sure enough, WMI has a quota, and it's kind of changed along the ways. But he wanted to know, hey, can you use PowerShell in order to query this quota and maybe even look at some of the performance on existing machines. So basically what's going on here, to make a long story short, is you have a host process for WMI that basically hosts your namespaces. And if it exceeds a certain amount of memory, handles, threads, so on and so forth, that process can die, and the machine basically dies at that point. So we were having some problems with this customer where the quota was being exceeded. So by default in 2000, well, starting with Vista, the quota for private memory, which we're going to look at specifically here, is 512. And before that, in XP, for example, 2003 is 128. So we would see issues where, if you're running SCOM, SCCM, and Hyper-V, that quota would be exceeded and you would have to make some adjustments. So that's sort of the backstory of why really you guys should even care that there's a quota, right? So let's have a look at that a little bit. So we'll go to scenarios. So how would, the first thing I'm going to do is, okay, well, I know I have this host process, this quota, so I'm going to execute this get sim class commandlet that I learned about earlier. And I'm going to run it. We're going to see what comes back. Now notice, because it's not in SimV2, it's in the root. To make this short, I know that's where that class is. So anyway, that's how I'll discover it. So we can actually take a look at this, and it comes back and it gives me, okay, well, here's my handles per host, memory all hosts, memory per host. The one that I'm interested in for this particular scenario is memory per host. So he wanted to query, a few machines. So the first thing that we're going to do is, because my Microsoft laptop is in the Microsoft domain, I have a lab, and my lab domain is different, but I'm going to capture my lab credentials. So when I run this guy, I'm going to specify a password, and if all goes well, I type that correctly. And then I'm going to grab from a list that he gives me a list of servers, and I'm going to store them in a variable. So the challenging thing with SIM is leveraging the SIM commandlets. Let me, here we go. So the challenging thing with SIM and the SIM commandlets is whenever you're interacting with it remotely, it uses WSMan. So on your download machines, they're still talking DCOM. They may not be talking WSMan. So we have to account for that. So here, I've created two variables. And I'm storing those server names in those variables. So this block of code right here, in essence what I'm going to do is I'm going to take both of those server lists and I'm going to make it one SIM session, so that when I go to query that data, I can just use a one-liner, let SIM take care of the for each basically, and iterate through all those machines. So what I end up having to do though is I have to, with my WSMan machines, I know which ones those are. I'm just going to use the default protocol, which SIM has, which is WSMan. But for the down level machines, I'm going to make SIM talk over DCOM. So that's what this is here. So on line 19 that you see, line 19 is I'm creating an empty array, and then I'm just adding to that array. And then the next thing that we're going to do is I'm going to create a SIM session protocol, or a SIM session option with the DCOM protocol. And I'm just basically going to add my DCOM machines to that same SIM session variable. So we'll run that. And notice what's in that SIM session variable. They're my SIM sessions now. Now I can work with it based on just that SIM session. So next up, and how many are familiar with splatting? All right, cool. So you guys know what a hash table is. So splatting is really cool, and the only reason that I'm using it in here, well, first off, there's an about topic for splatting. So if you're not familiar with it, you should go look at it because it's really cool. And it has a really cool name too, splatting. Anyway, so I'm splatting here for effect. Really, when we zoom in, if I were to put this one-liner, I would have to zoom, and it's just messy. So I am taking all of the parameters for a particular commandlet, for those that don't know what it is, and I am putting it in a hash table, which is a key value pair, and I'm passing that hash table to the commandlet. So I'm doing this a couple of times, and you'll see why here in just a moment, but I'm creating two splats. So the first splat is for my SIM query. So I'm going to query the host configuration data, and I'm going to pass it my SIM session that we created earlier. Notice I have the namespace parameter there as well. So we're going to run that guy. And then the next up, because I only want to isolate certain properties that are returned from that class, plus I want to format that data so that it's sort of user-friendly, that's where you'll notice this select splat here. So I'm going to use the select commandlet, or the select object commandlet, and I'm going to format the data using a hash table. So basically what you see right here is I'm creating a property name using this expression from the data. So memory per host, megabyte, so I don't have the long bytes, I have a truncated meg, so it's easy to read. I'm doing that for both the memory per host and memory all host properties. So we'll run this guy. And then at the end, I'm going to execute that query against my environment. So now we have this nice and neat output here. Notice I wasn't lying to you from before when I told you that this value has been increased. So now I have a proactive way to go out and see, okay, how many machines maybe have this quota issue, or how many people, or how many machines have somebody maybe messed with that quota and it needs to be adjusted. Well, Brian, that's all well and good, but how about querying the data? The data that I'm talking about here. So how would I use WMI to actually query the amount of private bytes that a particular process is using? You can do that in SIM, WMI. So again, I'm going to do my discovery piece. We'll run this guy. It comes back and it gives me all the classes. Now, just to explain again, I basically used get sim class, my discovery commandlet. I passed what I thought might work, a string, wildcard search. I selected the sim class name, and then I'm sorting sim class just so that I can see it in alphabetical order here. So I would look through it and go, okay, well, some of these look interesting. Well, as it turns out, perf formatted data, perf proc process data is the one that I'm after. And again, you see this this funny splat. It sounds funny just saying it. And I am passing the sim session parameter with my sim session, so I have all my machines, both DCOM and WSMan. I am specifying a class name. I'm also specifying a filter. So filter name like WMI PRVSC. That is the WMI host process I was talking to you guys about earlier. Kind of giving the backstory there. So that's the host process. And I'm using a percent. In WMI query language, percent is the wildcard character. So because most times there are more than one host process, I want to get back all the host processes per machine. So run that guy. And then the select is sort of the same, just to clean it up a little bit. I'm doing a little bit of formatting, just like we saw in the first example. So we go to run that. And now I have everything set up. So I can get some instance, feed it my splat, pipe it to select object, feed that my splat, and then we'll just format table auto size and we'll see what we get back. So that's taking way longer than it should. It's because I'm in demo mode and that's how things go. All right, so notice how we have all these properties returned in a nice formatable data. So I just use sim to query the performance of that particular host process on my environment to see if there are any offenders. Maybe there's some that are close that I need to investigate further. So scenario 2, and we'll try to go through this one because time is not on my side right now. How many has ever seen a blue screen?
Never.
Dude, what are you doing? If you're not breaking it, you're not working, right? All right, so how many have had blue screens because of drivers? That's kind of a trick question, right? So let's say we have this bad NIC driver that's causing some issues in my environment. How would I go and query it? That's kind of the story. I think that's probably why it's important to you. So why do you want to leverage WMI in order to view that information? So let's take a quick look at how I would do something like that. So for the sake of time, you guys understand the get sim class benefit. That's my discovery command. So those first few lines of code on 3 and 4, there's what they are what I am executing in order to understand better the data that I need to pull back. So take my word for it here. The class name that I'm interested in for this particular scenario is the PMP sign driver class. So I'm going to set it up for you. Not that Microsoft Hyper-V Network Adapter would ever cause a blue screen, right? But I'm doing it here for the lab demo purposes so that we actually get some data back from my Hyper-V environment. So we're going to run this Splat. I think by now you guys are comfortable with that. So I am passing sim session, class name, filter, properties into a hash table here. And the next thing is the select Splat. And again, I'm going to execute my short one-liner. And that class actually takes a little while to run, so I'll let it sit and bake for a minute while I talk about it. But basically, anytime that you are querying WMI, it's always best practice to use the filter when you can. And even extending that to the point where you use the property parameter also so that you pull back the specific properties that you want. So when you specify that properties parameter, when you're pulling back data, it will only return the properties that you're querying for in that particular class. So in theory, we hope it's a little lighter weight, right? And man, you know, in rehearsal, this was done by now. No, I really did rehearse, sorry. So anyway, so take my word for it. When it finishes, we'll have all of our bad network drivers that match that criteria. But while that's baking, and it's actually finished now. So let me show you what it returns, and sure enough, that's the data that it queried on. So let me go back real quick and talk about the filter here. So WMI filter is, you know, description equals, and you know, we can make it a compound filter by adding the and another property name and equals. So that way, only those two, as long as those two things match, that's what I'm getting back. Because typically, when you have a driver that's causing a blue screen, it's of particular, you know, description potentially, or and a version, right? So I'm only interested in the ones that could cause me issues. All right. So scenario 3. How many use WMI to query? Well, how many use a WMI class to query what software is installed on your machine? What class is that?
32 install software.
Install software. Is there another one? Product. You ever use that and look what happens to your machine?
It's terrible.
Yeah.
It's reinitializing like every size.
That's right. Yep. And basically, it's trying to provide some sort of health data for you, but it takes absolutely forever to run, and could potentially cause some issues. So let's take a look at WMI, not necessarily that particular class, and let me see how I can leverage the registry for this. So we'll move over to the ISE. And I have a couple of machines set up. So I'm going to have my, my 2 workstations that I'm curious about the particular software that's installed. So again, I have a down-level machine, which is a Windows 7 machine. It's going to operate off of DCOM when I query it remotely. And I have a Windows 8 machine that I'm just going to use WSMan for my remote query. So this first couple of lines of code, I'm going to run just to clean up my my sim session so that it's empty. And I'm going to run this next technique like we did initially to stage all my computer objects. Instead, this time I just have 2. The next thing I'm going to do is in a subkey, I am going to store that in an array, because in a 32-bit environment, you can get away with this key. All right? In a 64-bit environment, you need both keys. All right, and just like WMI, you were talking about folder structure and things like that, key in your registry is sort of like a container, which can also contain other containers or values, and of different value types or different types of the data that's there. So in essence, what I'm doing here is I am going to loop through each one of my sim sessions, okay? I'm going to first connect to the machine and then query the registry for the software. So let me kind of explain what this for each loop is doing. So I have nested for each because for each machine, I need to query each one of those subkeys that I specified above. All right. So I'm going to create another hash table that's for argument purposes this time. All right. For invoke sim method. And then I'm creating a hash table for a splat for the invoke sim method splat. So my arguments are going to be in a hash table. I'm going to add that arguments hash table. I'm going to add that to my parameter splat. Does that make sense? I'm seeing nods. All right, so let's run this guy. Also, so you don't think that this is some kind of voodoo magic, just random number I picked out of thin air. There is a MSDN. Anytime I deal with WMI or work with WMI, I will search MSDN so that I understand more about the class. Because obviously there are classes that aren't present in certain OSs, and I need to be cognizant of that. There are certain properties that aren't available in certain OSs. I need to be cognizant of that. So that way when I provide data that's being requested of me, I can be assured that, hey, if it's not present, there's a reason for it. So this Splat right here we run, and basically what I'm going to do initially is I'm calling the root default namespace, because it's not default. The class name is stdregprov for standard registry provider. And the arguments are going to be the arguments from this hash table. So basically the subkey name, or one of the subkey names that I defined above, and the hdef key, which is going to be like your HKey local machine, current user, classes root, so on and so forth. So I specified that argument hash table in the arguments here. And then that one session, because I'm looping through the sessions, I'll put that in the CIM sessions parameter. The method name for this particular class is name, and it's enum key. So I want to enumerate that key to find out all of the data that's there. So once I discover all that data, then I'm going to loop through that key looking for two things. I'm going to look for the uninstall string and the display name. So we'll run that. And we'll actually call the invoke sim method at this point. And I'm just going to expand the snames property, which is the subkey names, which is the value that's returned when you invoke this method. So I'm going to run that. I'm going to store it in this variable here. And then what I described to you earlier, I'm going to loop through each one of those keys, and I'm going to find the display name and the uninstall string. And I need to invoke sim method for each one of those. And I'm storing that in these variables. Also, the cool thing about Splat is I want you to notice here that I am adding and manipulating my parameter data in the Splat. So that's kind of another benefit to using Splat. So instead, before up above in this Splat right here, the name was a enum key, but now I'm defining it as getString value. So we're going to run this. Just run the whole thing, actually. So, yeah. And we'll see what it returns. Whoa! Yeah, that's not good. Whoops. Didn't mean for that to happen. So anyway, that's how you...
No wonder the Nick driver's causing blue strings.
Yeah, no kidding. Anytime we can stick it to them. Yeah, those guys. Anyway, so that's the software that I have installed on these machines. And really, who installed that? All right, I hope I didn't fit that. Anyway, evidently this guy. No, not really. Just kidding. So that's how we query, whether it's local or remote, using the registry via WMI. And something I did forget to do as a part of this demo. What benefit would you have doing it with CIM, other than just because it's really cool? Can somebody tell me maybe a benefit to do it over WMI than say .NET? All right, I'll throw you a bone here. What if .NET actually requires the remote registry service to be running? So I'm going to show you in this particular example here what happens. So I'm going to run this guy, and it's going to bomb on. And why does it bomb? Because let's take a look at using WMI as the theme of this would have it. Why did it bomb? Well, it bombed because remote registry is not started. So there's a dependency there, and that's why it's beneficial for you to maybe use and become familiar with WMI and querying the registry with WMI. So I can just kind of further take this out, and I will start that service for us. I will stop and start evidently. All right, and then when we come back up, use .NET query, and it works. So just so you know that there is a benefit why you would use WMI, using the registry provider to do that, or the registry class, I should say. All right, so moving right along, and I have not a lot of time left, so let me get through this last one, which is kind of the coolest one, and then if anybody has any follow-up questions or anything like that, I'll make my way for the next presenter, but we have about 8 minutes left. So let's say, all right, so the story behind this real quick. We had a SCCM administrator in my previous life as an admin. We had this administrator who modified a collection and an SCCM that would send out a collection of packages, like this huge number of packages, to all the workstations in our environment. So this was an Active Directory-based collection, and this person went and modified the collection. But she didn't realize what happened, because when she went to modify the syntax for the collection, she kind of left some things out, and when it queried Active Directory, it pulled all the computer objects in. So we had software going out to our servers. And because I don't want certain pieces of software installed on the servers, we had to come up with a quick solution. Because she was busy at the moment, and we didn't want her to, try to write an uninstall script or push that out via SCCM. I decided to kind of bake up a way to do it via WMI. So which brings us into the final scenario. So using WMI to uninstall software on remote machines, using the create method of the win32_process class, which is really cool. So, as you can see, I have some unauthorized software that I want uninstalled from my machine, right? And we can see this software clearly here, and it is in the add remove programs, right? So, not taking you through step by step, but this is stuff that we've done, throughout this this session and presentation. We're just going to run this guy, and I'll provide the code as well. So I'm going to run this. Yeah, trying to find something intelligent to say while this awkward pause. So anyway, while that's running, who participated in the scripting thing that we had last night? All right. So of the hands raised, your appetizer portion, did you use a hash table? You did. Cheater. Why? The rules clearly said what? Yes. Well, look, Ma. No semicolons. I can't take credit for this, but we had some of Gary Siepser, who's also a PFE. He helped us with this. But yeah. So we made this as short as humanly possible, which we spent most of the time trying to figure out how to do it without semicolons. That we didn't have time to do our others. So anyway. All right. So hey, look, that awkward pause is gone, and I managed to find something semi-intelligent to say. So maybe not, but then I'm sorry. So I'm going to close IE. I'm going to close this guy as well. Now open IE. Notice what we don't have. That unauthorized software is gone. And And just imagine the power of that, though, guys. Like, I can do that to my entire environment, right? I mean, you know, I can send that out to a bunch of machines, but just think about how powerful and destructive it could be as well. So, you know, be very careful when you go back to work. Be very careful who you show this to, right? They may not want to be. You may not want to.
I have a scenario like that right now. Will that uninstall pretty much anything?
It depends. Like the important thing is if the install happens via the Windows installer service.
So if all my systems have a dangerous, hackable piece of software, Internet Explorer, I can't use this to take ID up on my systems? I'm just checking, man.
This guy, I would expect nothing less from you, Mark. Thanks. All right, so let me move back to here. We didn't have time for the other ones. I can include some of that code if you're interested. How do you find more information? So I have to plug the scripting guys, the PowerShell blog. That is my, the aka.ms/Wilhite is my script center repository if you're interested in looking at some more code that I put out there. Also the meetup for the Charlotte PowerShell user group. And he's not here in the corner, but Richard Sidaway has an awesome PowerShell and WMI book. And if you enjoyed this, you will definitely enjoy that book because it has a lot to offer and you know, expands upon what we have discussed today. Also, Ed, the scripting guy's here, so I'll plug to it. His book's pretty good, and you know, obviously Don Jones, that book is awesome. So, but yeah, we don't really have a whole lot of time for questions because I want to be respectful for the next person that comes in. But I will make my way in the back if anybody has anything that they want to see or ask.